Why is Rishi Sunak betting the election on security?
Is it safe to give birth in Britain?
And Harry and Meghan, hot or not? Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Camilla Tominey.
And me, Kamal Ahmed.
Well, Kamal, our first Daily Tea.
A debut.
A debut after a good degree of piloting. Are you nervous?
No, not nervous. I hope that we can give our audience great informed information about today's news. That's what we're here for. Conversation, not a fight. We've got to make sure we don't fight, Camilla.
We would never fight. We're lovers, not fighters. Should we get into the first story? I think this whole idea of Rishi Sunak pitching himself now as the next Prime Minister is quite intriguing. The timing of it, the content of it. He's basically saying you must stick with me for the next 5 years because I'm better placed to lead the nation than Starmer, not just in the UK, but on the international stage, and very much positioning himself ahead of what we think will be an autumn election.
Big speech today. You're absolutely right, Camilla. When we were speaking this morning, you said that this was almost the starting gun. We'd had all the speculation around could possibly someone challenge him, would the local elections be so bad he would be gone very quickly after the local elections. He survived all that, and this is a stake in the ground for the overall message he wants to put out to the public about why he believes he should be Prime Minister for the next 5 years. And interestingly, he's gone for security as well as economics. And you can start seeing from today's speech the outlines of what that election campaign will really look like. Security and economics.
Let's have a listen.
Now, at some point in the second half of this year, we will all go to the polls and make a choice. Not just about Conservatives versus Labour or Sunak versus Starmer. It will be a choice between the future and the past. Now, I remain confident that my party can prevail, not because of our record alone, but because we will be the only party really talking about the future. And not with vague, lofty platitudes, but with bold ideas and a clear plan that can change our society for the better and restore people's confidence and pride in our country. Now, I feel a profound sense of urgency because more will change in the next 5 years than in the last 30. I'm convinced that the next few years will be some of the most dangerous, yet the most transformational that our country has ever known.
Sounded to me like the Prime Minister had quite a bad cold there as he was giving this keynote speech. We've shifted around a little bit. We've shifted around the table to accommodate Ben Riley-Smith, our political editor.
Hello. Literally walking in.
Oh, fresh from this speech at the Policy Exchange in Westminster.
Yep, that's right.
What's the general mood? Has he got a cold?
Well, he seemed to have a cold, yeah. There was something slightly catching in his throat. But it sounded like his answers were actually slightly harsher because of it, because he kind of lent in with the cold.
What, so you're saying he was quite punchy in there?
Yeah, oh yeah, he was, yeah. And it's really interesting. It's this kind of big picture reframing of the election campaign to be all about safety and security, and that's kind of ground that the Tories tend to be very strong on. And he was sometimes politicians hold back when you try to lead them to the consequence of what they're saying. But with him, when he was put, are you saying that with Labour and Keir Starmer, the country is more at risk and families are more at risk? And he said, yeah, that is what I'm saying. So he didn't resile from the realities of the argument he was putting forward.
Let's listen to that. Let's listen to that moment, because I think it was BBC's political editor, Chris Mason, who basically asked him exactly that and said, are you saying to the public, be careful what you wish for, it's better the devil you know? And this is what he replied.
Thank you, Chris Mason, BBC News. Let's cut to the quick here, Prime Minister. Are you saying the country would be less safe under Keir Starmer? And in summary, is this the beginning of an argument from you that says be careful what you wish for, better the devil you know?
In a word, yes.
It's quite surprising, isn't it, that the Prime Minister went that far and that direct to produce that dividing line. What you often get, Ben, is not only what did the speech sound like, but what was he like in that question and answer? Because often we found, haven't we, Camilla, when covering the Prime Minister, that he can become a little tetchy and irritated almost with the questions that you are impertinent enough to ask him.
Yeah.
Did it feel like that, Ben? Did he seem confident, or did he get to that tetchy
Well, I think
stage?
Downing Street would say pumped up rather than tetchy. So he had a kind of energy about him. And the speech, we're told, has been in the works for a couple of weeks. They wanted to get this defence announcement out of the way, get the locals out of the way. And then you can see he's been thinking about it a lot, because I think they think safety and security is a strand that runs through all of their policy positions. So not just the literal one, defence spending, but illegal immigration, their economic position, their net zero position, which they frame as energy security strategy. But yes, when you did push them a bit there, whether there's a kind of abrasiveness or a tetchiness or a willingness to actually quite firmly push back on the position, in situations like that, you never quite know if it's performative, because those are the challenges that are coming from Labour, or whether there's something slightly more personal about it. But he didn't seem overly tetchy, I'd say.
You asked him a question about when the election might be. Let's listen to that.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ben Riley-Smith from the Daily Telegraph. You're laying out your election pitch, but you won't tell us when the election is. Can you just be categorical and say you're not going to call an election for July?
So, Ben, I've been clear, I think, since right at the beginning of this year, that my working assumption is that we'll have an election in the second half of this year. Now, look, obviously, this question about election timing is a game that the Labour Party want to play, right? They want to make everything about process and not about substance. But I think the country deserves a more substantive debate than that. And look, when that election campaign does come, when people are considering that choice, I am happy to debate Keir Starmer as many times as he would like on that choice. I'm being very clear. I think this is the most dangerous and transformational time that our country has experienced in generations. That's a choice at the election. That's a substance that we should be debating. Now, I'm clear we are prepared to take the bold action that is necessary, that we have a clear plan that is working to deliver a secure future for everyone in our country. That's what the election should be about. That's the debate that we should be having.
Well, Rishi Sunak there has at least said he's going to do the TV debates in the next election campaign. Whether the public will thank him for that, I'm not sure. Just a little bit of intelligence to drop in. Certainly this idea that coming to the beginning of October with the Conservative Party conference, that a lot of the opposition parties believe that will be the moment that Sunak will call the election on the day of his speech at Tory party conference in October for a obviously a lot of people have said November the 14th, but a mid-November election. He did unpack a little bit more, didn't he, Ben, about when that election date might be? Because, of course, July is the second half of the year, but we don't believe it's going to happen now.
Frustrating.
Well, the whole thing is a little bit weird, because you have to think, why are they keeping this ambiguity about the date? And the only possible reason for doing that is that it gives you maximum flexibility, and they want to keep the door open to doing something before summer. And I think that's very, very, very unlikely, because they want the economy to improve, and it looks like it's going to be in a better place by the end of the year. They want to get Miranda flights off, and they might not get going before July. But for some reason, they have come up with a construction that allows the possibility that he could hold an election in June or July. And it's weird that he's not publicly just ruling that out.
But isn't there a contradiction at the heart of his positioning here? On one hand, I think it's great that he's actually set out a 5-year vision, because that's what particularly Tories and disaffected Tories have been asking for. What is it you actually believe? And he hit sort of like the classic Conservative bingo card there. He's talking about Starmer making the world more unsafe. He's talking to an extent about cancel culture. He's referencing the pro-Palestinian marches. He's doing all the things he needs to do. But talking of the last conference, I mean, there he positioned himself as the change candidate.
Yep.
This seems to be him saying, stick with us, better the devil you know. So this has been really confused in its messaging, I think.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear why, because it's not working. I mean, they are the party that's 20 points behind in the polls. So you can see them in the bunker thinking, I mean, the polls have just not changed. In fact, we've got slightly worse for the Tories over the last 6-9 months. So they did this reset in the autumn where it was, look, I can be changed. And actually, it's Starmer's continuity. It didn't work, because when you're been in power for 14 years and you want to go to 19 years, it's very hard to be the change candidate. So now they've come up with this different reframing, which is, OK, safety, security, that runs through all our positions. Let's outline that. But it does come from a position of political weakness, because they are still 20 points behind, and there may only be 5 or 6 months to go.
It's hard, isn't it? Because you look at him and you think, say if he pulled off a miracle and managed to win the next general election, would he still be there in 5 years' time?
If he pulled off the miracle, I would imagine he would have a very strong case for saying you're going to have to not only stick with the Conservatives for the next 5 years, you're going to have to stick with me. I think one of the issues for these types of speeches is that it becomes a bit of a policy salad. There are just too many things. I think your point, Ben, about him trying to bring together these themes, security, economy, immigration, all being of a one, I think is the one big headline thing that the public may just notice. And for us, it can sound a bit repetitive, but politicians have to say things over and over and over again before anyone really hears it amongst voters. I am much more interested in his demeanour and his confidence, and it's interesting, Ben, that you felt that he did seem sort of pumped up and leaning forward. The issue, of course, is how does the opposition respond, or Keir Starmer respond? Defence and security are so difficult for oppositions because as they chase around the world, they always are the mini-me in comparison with the leader of a country, the Prime Minister and the opposition. So it's quite good territory for Rishi Sunak because it's one of those dividing lines where he, in the end, has all the paraphernalia of the state, the outriders, the flights, the meetings with heads of states, presidents and prime ministers, and there's Keir Starmer trying to get a meeting with X, trying to get a meeting with Y. Keir Starmer, interestingly, this is one of his big missions. I'm sure the public have forgotten Keir Starmer's missions, but I was looking them up this morning. One of his missions was genuinely exactly what Rishi Sunak has said today, this notion of security and economics together. But for the opposition, they don't get cut through, because they just don't meet the right people at the right meetings for the public to say, oh, there's Keir Starmer doing something interesting.
Also, the context of him becoming a global statesman, it's going to be awkward for him because people in his shadow cabinet have made all of these unfortunate remarks, particularly about Donald Trump, Ben. I mean, that's problematic. What David Lammy has said about Donald Trump, should he become president again, it's going to make life extremely difficult for the potential of a Prime Minister Starmer.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the more interesting bits of the speech, is he was weaponising Labour's past record under Corbyn. So he kept on saying, Keir Starmer, here is a bloke who wanted Corbyn to be Prime Minister not once but twice. And he picked out people in the shadow cabinet, I think like David Lammy, and said these people voted to get rid of Trident, the heart of our nuclear deterrence. So Rishi Sunak is definitely trying to... Well, that's the irony, is 2019 Corbyn was standing. Now Labour have tried a huge amount to kind of draw the line and bury his political legacy, but the Tories will keep on raking it up.
He could have been saying this for the past 18 months, 2 years. This is odd. The timing's good because Labour on the back foot. I think the Elphick defection has massively backfired. We also had good economic news last week, despite Rachel Reeves suggesting that the government was gaslighting the general public. So the timing's good to the extent of they're capitalising on Labour's misery. But at the same time, why haven't these attack lines been in place for months?
Well, I think the truth is they've tried other attack lines and they haven't worked especially well. But it almost comes back to Kamal's point. Are they now going to keep on hammering this attack line every day, every week for the next 3, 4, 5 months until the election comes? Or in a couple of months' time, are we going to see them reframing it in a different way?
And just on that polling evidence, if you think back to 2019, the Conservatives, I've looked back at the YouGov polling on this, the Conservatives on the question of who is best on defence and security for the nation were 20 points ahead, so 34% to 10% for Labour under Corbyn. Those figures are becoming closer and closer, and if you ask the same question today, the public both are saying 22% each. They are now level pegging. And Camilla, we've spoken about this a few times, this idea that these very solid issues for Conservatives, immigration, security, have become, for the public, much more evenly balanced between the Conservatives and Labour. So, as you're saying, Camilla, Rishi Sunak needs to stick to a line and keep prosecuting it for the public to see it. But Ben, your point is that everything he does, the polls drift endlessly in one direction, and for the Conservatives that direction is mostly negative.
Yeah, I remember Labour shadow cabinet member once telling me at a conference, the great strength of Keir Starmer is when voters close their eyes and see him outside of number 10, their heart rate doesn't start going up and up and up. And that wasn't true with Corbyn, and that wasn't true with Ed Miliband. But fundamentally being a grey, sincere, quite decent bloke. It makes it very hard when you're trying to weaponise past positions, which is what the Tories are doing now. This guy has run our entire prosecutions department. He's in his 50s. He's pretty moderate. So that cuts against these attacks when the Tories are trying to make him out. They're literally saying your life and your livelihood would be more at risk if you went for this guy. Well, that's quite hard to do with Starmer in the way it was easier to do with past Labour leaders, I think.
Ben, we'll let you get back to Westminster. Thanks so much.
OK, thanks for having me.
Just one little final anecdote to this bit. I remember speaking to William Hague, and he said to me, after he had stopped being leader of the Conservative Party in 2001, what the public need to be able to imagine is the next Prime Minister of the UK walking across the White House lawn with the President of the United States. If they can imagine that, they can imagine this person being Prime Minister.
Although here's an irony, William Hague didn't accept the role of Foreign Secretary and it went to David Cameron. And at the moment, weirdly, the person that you can most imagine walking across the lawn at the White House isn't necessarily Rishi Sunak, it's David Cameron.
Well, this morning we had a really quite shocking report on the state of maternity services across the UK. It's a cross-party report, which I think for many of our audience will be welcomed. It's good to see the parties coming together on such an important issue when in the past they've often been fighting. It's a report that's been put together over the last 3 months by the all-party group on maternity. It's called Birth Trauma. It's seen over 1,300 submissions, and some of those submissions are absolutely frightening. They show shocking evidence about the treatment of women during birth, postnatal care, stillbirth, premature birth, babies born with cerebral palsy caused by oxygen deprivation and often left with life-changing injuries. Also, when these errors are raised with hospitals, the hospitals themselves often cover up the evidence and seem to have frustrated parents' efforts to find answers. Last part was about overwork and understaffing as well, but really a very sobering read.
Obviously, we have, over the course of recent decades, heard a lot about different neonatal scandals. This story was brought home in the House of Commons last October, and it began with a Conservative MP called Theo Clarke, who has ended up co-chairing the group that produced this report, talking in extremely moving terms about the trauma she suffered when she gave birth to her daughter Arabella. That was in August 2022. It's quite a harrowing listen, but this is what she said.
Last year, I had a very traumatic birth at my local hospital in Staffordshire. I had expected to have that first hour with my beautiful daughter and had imagined her magically crawling up my chest to start breastfeeding. Instead, after a difficult 40 hours of labour, I began bleeding very heavily after delivery. I was separated from my baby and rushed into the emergency room for surgery. I remember the trolley bumping into the walls and the medical staff taking me into theatre and being slid onto the operating table. I spent over 2 hours awake without a general anaesthetic, and I could hear them talking about me, and obviously it was not looking good. It was the most terrifying experience of my life.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Yes, I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for what she is talking about.
Now, that was Dame Andrea Leadsom stepping in just to give Theo Clarke some time there, just to recompose herself. I mean, you can hear, even though this is more than a year after the event, that she is still deeply traumatised by it. She's able then to get up and speak again.
It was the most terrifying experience of my life. I genuinely thought I was going to die. So can I really put on the record now my immense thanks to the fantastic NHS team at Royal Stoke University Hospital who carried out my surgery and the midwives who were with me during labour. In particular, I'd like to thank my surgeon Nitish, my midwives Michelle and Stacey, my health visitor Chris, my mental health advocate Judith, and Nicole at the Perineal Clinic. But this entire experience also completely opened my eyes to challenges with postnatal care in this country. I remember being wheeled into the recovery ward after surgery, where I encountered a nurse who hadn't read her notes and had assumed I'd had a C-section. I was then moved to a side room, where I was hooked up to a catheter and a drip, and I was lying in bed next to my baby with her screaming in the cot next to me, and I couldn't pick her up. I pressed the call button for help, and a lady came in and said, "Not my baby, not my problem," and left me there.
I mean, that testimony is harrowing for any woman, any parent, Kamal, particularly women who have suffered birth trauma. We also heard this weekend, Kamal, Louise Thompson, who used to be in Made in Chelsea. She's just written a book about her own very harrowing birth experience, giving birth to her son Leo in November 2021. It's called Lucky Learning to Live Again. And the line that stood out to me as a mum from that book is, she says, "Childbirth destroyed everything that was good in my life because of the health problems that she suffered subsequently." And the question I'm asking myself is, every time there's been a neonatal scandal, be it Morecambe Bay, be it Shrewsbury and Telford, be it East Kent, there have been plenty, tragically, over the years. We always hear that lessons must be learned, and this report seems to suggest that they haven't.
You're just going around those same houses again and again, Camilla, as you say. We know there is now an investigation at Nottingham University Hospital as well into treatment of mothers there. And when you read the report, there is really harrowing testimony from many, many women. What we're getting here is this notion of lottery, the lottery of care, and it goes across so many different areas. There's the postcode lottery. Is the hospital you are near good at this stuff? Then there's the economic lottery. If you can pay your way for support, for doulas, for going to maybe some private operations as well, you might be okay. You might be able to avoid some of the worst parts of the experience. And also there's the lottery of ethnic background. We have seen many, many times that Black and South Asian heritage women are particularly badly treated. And this report has said that there have been examples of direct and indirect racism. It does seem difficult for the health service, as you say, after Morecambe Bay, after Shrewsbury and Telford, after East Kent, to learn those lessons. And the data that we look at, and it's clearly been very affected by COVID, says that the maternal mortality rate, number of women who die in childbirth, is now at its highest since 2005. Very small numbers. We need to be very clear. This is not big numbers. This is in the hundreds, but everyone, of course, an appalling tragedy. But just like the way that our prisons operate, the treatment of maternity services is a signal of a wider health issue. If we get this wrong, it often is a signal that things are going wrong in the rest of the health service.
As a woman going into childbirth, you do have it in mind that it's a lottery for you as an individual too. I mean, people try and say to you when you're pregnant, pregnancy is not an illness. No. And they say, people have babies every day. And my response to that was, well, I don't. I don't have a baby every day. In fact, I ended up having 3. I had what I would describe as good births, good natural births with all 3. I was lucky. I have plenty of friends who had a very bad experience, and that experience lives with you for life. I was interested to read some of the reader comments to the story that we've done about the report. Let's just hear from Helen Elliott, who writes, "I am still reduced to tears by the memory of the birth of my first child over 25 years ago. Left alone for hours labouring, in agony, not allowed pain relief because I wasn't far enough along. It took me 4 years to have another. I was so terrified." What we keep on hearing in these stories, and this was a quarter of a century ago, is women not having enough agency in their childbirth. Now, you're at your most vulnerable when you're giving birth. It is a terrifying experience. For many women, myself included, my dad was a GP. We never went to the surgery. I never went into a clinical setting really at all. It was my first experience in a medicalised environment, and that's quite intimidating in itself, let alone the act of giving birth and all that involves. So many times we hear that women are asking for caesarean sections and not being listened to, that their instinct is that something's gone wrong with either them or the baby and their concerns are brushed aside. There's also, which I think complicates matters, this tug of war within hospitals between maternity-led units and midwives, and then the more hospitalised side of things, the more sort of medicalised aspect of how doctors and consultants behave.
The report talks about the role of fathers in these situations, often very emotionally distressing. situations, how can the father be supported to become the advocate for their partner or for their wife who is going through childbirth and maybe things are going wrong? And again, for fathers, as for you, it's often the first experience you have in a medical situation, and you're not the expert. As you say, there's the midwifery services, and then there's also the doctors themselves. There's a broader point as well, and there's a lot of evidence for this across so many different groups, but of course for women in particular here, just not being listened to properly, what you call agency. This idea that the people in the slightly more patient end of this, of course, having a baby doesn't make you a patient, but as the health service looks at you, you're on the patient side of this, you're being cared for, are not listened to about what it is that they need and what it is that they are saying. And it does give you a feeling of some depression that, as you say, this is not unusual. This shouldn't surprise anyone. This report coming out shouldn't be surprising to anybody that we're still here in this situation.
But then women put up with so much. I mean, even postnatally, you hear from some of the urological problems that women are putting up with, and you think to yourself, men wouldn't put up with this. And it's almost like, well, it's a part of childbirth, just get on with it, even if it affects you for the rest of your life. We're talking about agency. The other advocate for any mother should, of course, be their GP. And I referred to my father earlier. My father, back in the day, used to deliver babies. He's delivered hundreds and hundreds of babies. And with that old school style of doctoring, you would have a GP looking after the mother. It might have even been a patient when she was a child. Then obviously the GP has perhaps helped that woman with her contraception. Then that woman's gone to the GP and said, I want to start a family. Then that GP has overseen the whole of her maternity care, perhaps even then delivered her baby. Then when that woman comes back a month later and just doesn't look like she's herself, the GP is then able to tell she's not herself. I think she's got postnatal depression. And you get a complete continuity of care, which is one of the problems. That's what's lacking here. I don't think I saw the same midwife twice throughout any of my 3 pregnancies. And when you arrive in the birthing centre, you don't know what midwife you're going to get. You know, there's this kind of Americanised vision of having the same consultant and midwife throughout. Obviously, people are paying for that service, and the NHS does the best that it can. But I think we're identifying here shortfalls, and they always seem to happen in maternity, possibly because, you know, it's low down on the list of funding priorities right now.
What is good to see? This is cross-party, so let's see if there is some hope here. Cross-party, very simple set of recommendations about real clarity about what the service that should be provided to mothers going through childbirth. And let's hope that the parties can stick to this cross-party approach and hopefully stop us being a country where safety is 3 times better in Norway than it is here.
Kamal, before we discuss Harry and Meghan in Nigeria, which is the moment we've all been waiting for, let's be honest.
Absolutely.
Prince William and the King have been photographed together today because the King is handing over his Colonel-in-Chiefdom of the Army Air Corps to Prince William, and he's commented that he's a very good pilot. If you consider that the Army Air Corps was once Prince Harry's regiment, that might grate a little bit.
Now, Camilla, you need to explain to those of us not quite as deeply enmeshed in royal politics as you are, or your knowledge is very deep here. Just explain to us what that could be seen to mean.
Well, I mean, he's posing here in front of an Apache helicopter. That's the aircraft that I would say is most closely associated with Prince Harry, because he flew Apaches when he fought on the front line. It's because he flew Apaches when he fought on the front line. Prince William's also a pilot. But I think to see the King be praising William for his piloting skills.
And also, didn't the King and Prince Harry not have time to meet up?
Yes.
Only a few days ago.
Yes.
And then here's a picture with my other son.
Yes.
Is that a little tricky?
But this is official business, whereas the meet-up that didn't take place, it's strange because normal families just have a cup of tea. but royal families have to schedule appointments because obviously William and Harry's father isn't just a dad, he's also a monarch. But the whole thing's a bit odd. But should we talk about a happier royal story involving Harry and Meghan? Because they must be delighted, Kamal, with their coverage of their Nigerian tour. So they spent 3 days in Nigeria, effectively to promote the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games initiative. This is
Just explain. Oh, sorry, you are going to explain
just
that,
about
Camilla.
to explain.
I'm so sorry.
I'm just into that.
Let's do that again. Sorry, my fault.
They spent 3 days in Nigeria to mark the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games initiative. The Invictus Games was established by Prince Harry a decade ago to be a sort of Olympics and Paralympics for wounded ex-service personnel. It's been a huge success. I think you could probably argue it's the best initiative he ever launched. It's going great guns still. But what I thought was quite intriguing about the last 3 days is it was meant to be about Invictus, and there's some lovely copy from some of the jobs that Prince Harry has done with wounded ex-service men and women, but instead the headlines have been dominated by Meghan and what Meghan's been wearing.
I think you and I may be in slightly different places here on
Really?
Harry and Meghan. Obviously, always agreeable, but I think Harry and Meghan are good for the royal family because they do bring a different emotion, a different style, a different connection with people that the other members of the royal family aren't able to do at such a time as well when obviously Catherine is not able to do all the duties she would normally be doing, and the king has also been not able to do all the duties he wants to do. Surely it's about and, not about either or. I think that I sense there's a frustration that they can't just come together and use all the members of the royal family to get to different audiences and to show different faces around the world.
I think they're good for the royal family when they're not trashing them on Oprah, in Netflix or in Harry's autobiography Spare. Actually, the royal family would have been quite happy with this because they're in Nigeria. They're basically carrying out a royal tour in all but name. And I agree that they are modern and vibrant and they appeal to a different audience. I do think that it's interesting that the model they decide to adopt when they do their own kind of overseas mission is precisely the royal one. There's red carpets, there's handshakes with heads of state, there's sort of panel discussions, and there's a visit to a school to discuss mental health. If they were real pioneers, they might have mixed it up a bit and did something differently. Also, this is a perennial problem for royal couples. You've got Harry there who wants to talk about Invictus. You've got the much more glamorous Meghan speaking about her Nigerian heritage, wearing this beautiful array of outfits that's always going to make front page news. There's slight shades of Charles being overshadowed by Diana here. The difference is Charles wasn't happy about that, whereas actually Harry seems quite willing to bask in his wife's spotlight. And Kamal, breathe out.
We finished our first episode, and for all of you that have stuck to this moment, we thank you dearly because this is a new thing for the Telegraph, for all of us. We want to do news differently. We want to have conversations about the news, and we would love you to be with us on this journey. So thank you from the bottom of both our hearts, from the whole team as well. This is not just about Camilla and me, it's about a whole team that put this together across the Telegraph. We've got this far.
Thank you so much, and please listen again tomorrow at 5 p.m.